We all know that feeling. Someone does something that gets under our skin. Maybe they're always late, or they talk too much, or they seem too bossy. That surge of irritation feels so natural, so justified. We think, if only they would change, everything would be fine. But what if these irritations are not just about other people? What if they are actually messages about ourselves? The famous psychologist Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This simple idea has the power to change how we see our relationships and ourselves. When we feel strongly bothered by someone else's behavior, it often points to something important within us. It might be showing us a quality we don't like to admit we have. It might reveal a fear we carry, or it might highlight a need we haven't recognized. This concept is known as psychological projection. We project onto others the parts of ourselves that we find hard to accept. Then, we react strongly when we see these qualities in someone else. For example, a person who judges others for being too emotional might actually be uncomfortable with their own emotions. Someone who gets angry about others being unreliable might fear their own potential to let people down. And someone who can't stand show-offs might be hiding their own desire for attention and recognition. Our strongest reactions are rarely random. They often follow patterns that can teach us about our own inner world. Jung developed this idea as part of his work on what he called the shadow. The shadow contains all the parts of ourselves that we have pushed out of awareness because they don't fit with how we want to see ourselves. These might include traits like selfishness, laziness, greed, or anger. We all have these qualities to some degree, but many of us work hard to deny them. The problem is that denied aspects of ourselves don't simply disappear. Instead, they operate from the unconscious, influencing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in ways we don't recognize. One way they reveal themselves is through our strong reactions to these same qualities in others. This is why our irritations often seem out of proportion to what actually happened. We might become intensely angry about a small mistake or deeply hurt by a minor oversight. The strength of our reaction comes not just from the current situation, but from the accumulated force of our denied feelings. Consider the case of a teacher who becomes extremely frustrated with disorganized students. This teacher might value order and structure highly because of experiences in their own life. Perhaps growing up in an unpredictable home environment led them to seek control through organization. The disorganized student reminds them of a chaotic past they've worked hard to overcome. By recognizing this connection, the teacher might gain compassion both for the student and for their younger self, who once struggled with chaos. This awareness doesn't mean the teacher should stop valuing organization, but it might help them respond with understanding rather than irritation. Many of our most deeply held values form in response to painful experiences. If a parent was absent in our childhood, we might grow up determined to be present for others. If we felt ignored, we might become very attentive to others' needs. These adaptations help us survive and thrive. But when they become rigid rules that we expect everyone to follow, they can create suffering. Our early relationships, particularly with parents or primary caregivers, set patterns that often play out throughout our lives. We might find ourselves repeatedly irritated by authority figures who remind us of a controlling parent. Or we might feel especially bothered by people who don't express enough appreciation, echoing feelings from childhood of not being valued. Even our cultural and social context shapes what irritates us. We absorb values and expectations from our communities about how people should behave. When others violate these norms, we feel justified in our irritation. Yet different cultures have different norms, suggesting that many of our reactions are learned rather than natural. None of this means our irritations aren't real or valid. They are genuine emotional responses based on our unique histories and perspectives. But understanding their roots gives us more choices about how to respond. Certain patterns of irritation appear frequently across different people and relationships. Recognizing these common themes can help us identify what might be happening in our own reactions. Many people feel strong irritation toward either extreme control or extreme chaos. Those who value structure might be deeply bothered by people who seem disorganized or unpredictable. Those who value freedom might feel suffocated by people who plan everything carefully. These reactions often reflect our own relationship with control. If we fear chaos because it reminds us of painful past experiences, we might become controlling as a way to feel safe. Then we feel threatened when others don't follow our preferred way of doing things. Alternatively, if we experienced excessive control in our past, we might value freedom and spontaneity highly. We then become irritated by anyone who seems to be imposing rules or limitations. How people express or don't express emotions is another common source of irritation. Some people feel uncomfortable around those who show strong emotions openly. Others feel frustrated by those who seem emotionally closed or unexpressive. These reactions often connect to our own comfort level with emotions. If we were taught that certain emotions are inappropriate or dangerous, we might feel anxious when others express these feelings freely. If we learn to hide our feelings, we might be irritated by others who do the same, as they mirror our own struggle to connect authentically. Many irritations center around how much attention or recognition people seek or receive. We might feel bothered by someone who seems to want too much of the spotlight, or we might be annoyed by someone who doesn't speak up enough. These reactions often relate to our own needs for validation and recognition. If we were criticized for seeking attention as children, we might judge others who do so openly. If we struggle to claim the recognition we deserve, we might feel frustrated by those who have similar difficulties. How much people rely on others versus standing on their own is another common trigger. Some people feel irritated by those who seem too dependent or needy. Others feel bothered by those who never ask for help or seem too self-sufficient. These reactions typically connect to our own comfort with needing others. If we fear becoming dependent because it feels unsafe or shameful, we might judge others who openly express needs. If we struggle to act independently, we might be bothered by extremely self-sufficient people who remind us of our own insecurities. Many people feel strong irritation related to standards of performance. Some get very bothered by what they perceive as carelessness or lack of effort. Others feel uncomfortable around those who seem perfect or who expect perfection. These reactions often relate to our own inner critic and fear of failure. If we judge ourselves harshly for mistakes, we're likely to judge others similarly. If we feel crushed by expectations of perfection, we might resent those who seem to embody or demand it. The pathway from irritation to self-understanding involves several steps. First, we must notice our irritations. Instead of immediately blaming the other person, we can pause and recognize the strong feeling as a signal. The stronger the irritation, the more important the message might be. Second, we can get curious about our reaction. What exactly bothers us about this behavior? When have we felt this way before? Are there patterns in the things that irritate us? Third, we can look for connections to our own life story. How might this irritation connect to our past experiences, our values, or our fears? What might it be showing us about ourselves? This process isn't about blaming ourselves for our reactions. It's about using those reactions as doorways to greater self-awareness. When we understand the roots of our irritations, we gain freedom. We can choose how to respond rather than simply reacting. Let's explore how this process might work with some common irritations. Many people feel irritated by those who complain constantly. If this bothers you intensely, you might ask, What does this irritation reveal about me? Perhaps you were raised to look on the bright side and feel uncomfortable with negative emotions. The complainer might be expressing feelings you don't allow yourself to have. Or perhaps you actually have many complaints yourself, but don't feel entitled to voice them. The complainer might be doing what you wish you could do. Understanding this doesn't mean you have to enjoy constant complaining, but it might help you respond with more compassion, both for the other person and for the parts of yourself that also need acknowledgement. If you feel particularly bothered by someone who seems to always want the spotlight, this might reveal something about your own relationship with attention and recognition. Perhaps you were criticized for showing off as a child and learned to hide your accomplishments. Or maybe you actually desire more recognition, but don't know how to seek it appropriately. The attention seeker might be expressing a need that you also have, but don't acknowledge. This awareness might help you find healthier ways to meet your own needs for recognition while being less judgmental of others who seek attention more openly. If you feel suffocated by people who try to control situations or other people, this might connect to your own issues with control. Perhaps you experienced excessive control in your childhood and developed a strong need for freedom in response. Or maybe you struggle with feelings of helplessness and resent others who seem more able to influence their surroundings. The controlling person might remind you of your own fears about being controlled or about losing control. Understanding this connection might help you set healthy boundaries while recognizing that the desire for control often stems from anxiety or past experiences of powerlessness. If you feel intensely irritated by people who don't follow rules or social norms, this might reveal something about your own relationship with authority and structure. Perhaps you invested heavily in following the rules and feel it's unfair when others don't do the same. Or maybe you actually envy the freedom that rule breakers seem to enjoy, but don't allow yourself the same liberties. The rule breaker might be expressing a rebelliousness that you've suppressed. This insight might help you examine which rules truly matter to you and why, while developing more flexibility about those that are less essential. If you feel particularly bothered by people who leave things to the last minute, this might connect to your own fears or tendencies around timeliness and responsibility. Perhaps you push yourself hard to be prepared and responsible, and resent others who don't seem to make the same effort. Or maybe you actually struggle with procrastination yourself and have developed a harsh inner critic in response. The procrastinator might mirror parts of yourself that you're trying to overcome. Understanding this might help you have more compassion for different working styles while maintaining your own boundaries around deadlines. This understanding also helps us in our relationships. When we recognize that our irritations often say more about us than about others, we can hold them more lightly. We might still prefer that people be punctual or speak softly or maintain cleanliness, but we no longer need them to change in order for us to feel okay. The practice of seeing irritation as a pathway to self-understanding works in all types of relationships, with family members, friends, co-workers, and even strangers. Each difficult interaction becomes an opportunity to learn and grow. A husband annoyed by his wife's worrying might discover his own tendency to avoid necessary concerns. A mother frustrated by her teenager's risk-taking might recognize her own unfulfilled desire for adventure. A worker irritated by a chatty colleague might realize how much they struggle to set healthy boundaries. This approach doesn't mean ignoring genuine problems or staying in harmful situations. Some behaviors, like abuse or serious disrespect, should not be tolerated. But even in those cases, our emotional reactions can teach us about our values and needs. The journey from irritation to understanding takes time and practice. We've spent years developing our patterns of reaction. Changing them requires patience with ourselves. Some helpful practices include when something bothers you significantly, Write it down. Note what happened, how you felt, and what it might be showing you about yourself. Look for patterns over time. Do certain situations or types of people consistently trigger strong reactions? What might these patterns reveal about your own sensitivities or unmet needs? Writing helps create distance between the immediate emotional reaction and our response. It allows us to see more clearly what might be happening beneath the surface of our irritation. When irritation arises, pause before reacting. Take a breath and remind yourself that this feeling might have a message for you. Ask yourself, what exactly am I feeling right now? What about this situation is triggering me? What might this reveal about me? This pause doesn't need to be long. Even a few seconds can help create space between stimulus and response. In that space lies the freedom to choose rather than simply react. Look for themes in what bothers you most. Do you get especially irritated by certain types of behaviors? What might these patterns reveal? For example, if you notice that you're consistently bothered by people who speak loudly or take up space, you might explore your own comfort with being seen and heard. If you're frequently irritated by people who need emotional support, you might examine your own feelings about vulnerability and neediness. Sometimes others can see our blind spots more clearly than we can. A trusted friend might help you identify patterns in your irritations and connect them to aspects of yourself that you don't easily see. Choose people who will be honest but kind, not those who will simply agree with your assessment of others or who might use your vulnerabilities against you. The goal is greater self-understanding, not self-criticism. Professional support can be valuable in exploring deep-rooted patterns and healing past wounds that fuel current irritations. A therapist can provide a safe space to examine difficult emotions and develop new ways of relating to yourself and others. Therapy is particularly helpful for irritations that seem resistant to change or that seriously impact your relationships and quality of life. This approach to irritation can transform many areas of life. Let's explore how it might apply in different contexts. Family members often trigger our strongest irritations precisely because these relationships connect deeply to our early experiences and identity formation. Parents, siblings, and children push our buttons in ways that friends or colleagues rarely do. A father might feel intensely irritated by his son's shyness, only to realize that it reminds him of his own past struggles with confidence. A woman might be repeatedly annoyed by her mother's worry, not recognizing that she fears developing the same anxious tendencies herself. By seeing these irritations as mirrors, family members can break cycles of judgment and criticism. They can begin to accept both themselves and each other more fully, recognizing that many annoying behaviors stem from genuine needs and fears rather than willful difficulty. Work environments often bring together people with different styles, values, and backgrounds. These differences can create friction, especially under stress or time pressure. An employee who values efficiency might feel constantly irritated by detail-oriented colleagues who seem to slow things down. A manager who prefers direct communication might be bothered by team members who use softer, more indirect approaches. By recognizing what these irritations reveal about their own values and needs, workers can develop more effective ways of collaborating across differences. They can learn to appreciate complementary strengths rather than seeing differences as problems to fix. Many social and political conflicts involve mutual irritation between groups with different values or practices. These irritations often reveal deep fears and unmet needs on both sides. Those who value tradition might feel bothered by rapid social change, revealing their need for stability and continuity. Those who seek change might feel irritated by traditional practices, showing their own need for freedom and new possibilities. By exploring what lurks beneath these irritations, Societies can develop more nuanced understandings of complex issues. They can find common ground in shared human needs rather than remaining stuck in polarized positions. Perhaps the most powerful application of this approach is in personal development. Each irritation becomes a signpost pointing toward aspects of ourselves that need attention and integration. A person bothered by others' success might discover their own unfulfilled ambitions. Someone irritated by public displays of affection might recognize their own hunger for intimacy. An individual annoyed by time wasters might realize their fear of mortality and not accomplishing enough. These insights don't automatically resolve the irritation, but they transform its meaning. Rather than being simply an unpleasant reaction to others, irritation becomes a valuable guide to our own internal landscape. While Jung's quote focuses on irritation, the mirror principle works with positive reactions too. The qualities we admire in others often reflect potentials within ourselves, aspects that we may have overlooked or undervalued. If you consistently admire people who take creative risks, this might reveal your own unexpressed creativity. If you're drawn to those who speak truth to power, this might connect to your own desire for authenticity and courage. By recognizing these positive mirrors, we can discover and develop aspects of ourselves that need expression. We can move toward greater wholeness by integrating both the parts we've rejected, shown by our irritations, and the parts we've neglected, shown by our admirations. As we practice this approach, we often find ourselves becoming more compassionate, both toward others and toward ourselves. We recognize that many irritating behaviors stem from other people's wounds and fears, just as our reactions stem from our own. This doesn't mean we stop having preferences or setting boundaries. It simply means we hold our reactions differently. We see them as information rather than truth, as starting points for exploration rather than endpoints of judgment. Over time, our irritations become less intense. When they do arise, we welcome them as messengers rather than fighting them as enemies. We learn to ask, what might this be showing me? Rather than, why are they like that? The beauty of Jung's insight is that it transforms ordinary emotional reactions into opportunities for growth. Every person who irritates us becomes a potential teacher. Every button pushed becomes a chance to understand ourselves better. In this way, even difficult relationships serve our development. The coworker who never stops talking, the family member who always criticizes, the friend who constantly changes plans, each offers us a mirror in which we can see ourselves more clearly. How can we actually apply this understanding in daily life? Here are concrete steps to transform irritation into self-knowledge. The process begins with awareness. Pay attention to when you feel that surge of irritation. What specific behavior triggered it? What thoughts immediately followed? Where did you feel the irritation in your body? This awareness creates a small space between the trigger and your reaction, a space in which choice becomes possible. Notice the intensity of your reaction. On a scale of 1 to 10, how irritated do you feel? Reactions that seem out of proportion to the situation, a 7 to 10 for something relatively minor, often reveal important information about underlying patterns. Identify the assumption behind your irritation. Most irritations include an implicit should or shouldn't. People shouldn't be late. People should clean up after themselves. People shouldn't talk so loudly. Question where this assumption comes from. Is it based on a universal principle, a cultural norm, a family value, or your personal preference? Is it something everyone would agree with, or might others see the situation differently? Ask how this trigger connects to your personal history. When have you felt this way before? Does this person remind you of someone from your past? Does this situation echo previous experiences that were painful or difficult? Look for patterns across different irritations. Do they center around similar themes, or trigger similar emotional responses. These patterns often reveal core wounds or foundational beliefs that need attention. Ask what this irritation might be showing you about yourself. Do you have the same quality you're bothered by, perhaps in a different form? Are you judging in others what you fear in yourself? Or are you reacting to something that represents an unfulfilled need or denied aspect of your own nature? This step requires honesty and willingness to look beneath surface appearances. The connection might not be obvious at first glance. Extend compassion both to yourself and to the other person. Recognize that irritating behaviors often stem from fears, wounds, or unmet needs, just as your reactions do. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior, but it does mean seeing the humanity behind the actions. Compassion doesn't require approval or agreement. It simply means acknowledging the reality that we all struggle and do the best we can with the resources we have at any given moment. Based on your new understanding, choose how to respond. This might mean setting a boundary, engaging in a conversation, making a request, or simply letting go of the expectation that prompted your irritation. Whatever response you choose, it can now come from awareness rather than reactivity. It can address the real issues at hand rather than just the surface behavior that triggered your irritation. Ask what this situation has to teach you about yourself. How might this insight help you become more whole? What would change if you fully accepted this aspect of yourself that you've been projecting onto others? Integration might involve developing a quality you've denied, healing a wound you've ignored, or meeting a need you've neglected. It moves you toward greater wholeness and authenticity. As with any practice of self-awareness, several obstacles can arise when working with irritation as a mirror. Here's how to address them. It's often easier to blame others than to look at ourselves. We might resist the idea that our irritations reveal anything about us, preferring to see them as simply rational responses to others' problematic behavior. When this resistance arises, approach it with curiosity rather than judgment. Ask yourself, what makes self-reflection difficult in this situation? What might I be protecting by focusing only on the other person? Simply noticing resistance can begin to soften it. Sometimes the connection between our irritation and our own denied qualities isn't obvious. We might sincerely believe we don't possess the trait that bothers us in another person. In these cases, look for the trait in different forms or contexts. For example, someone who is irritated by others' anger might not express anger in the same way, but might harbor resentment or passive aggression. Someone bothered by others' neediness might not depend on others emotionally, but might seek validation in different ways. Ask trusted friends or a therapist to help you see potential blind spots. Often, others can recognize patterns in us that we cannot see ourselves. Some people worry that understanding the psychological roots of their irritation means they must accept behavior that genuinely interferes with their well-being or values. They fear that self-reflection will lead to passivity in the face of problems. Remember that understanding doesn't preclude action. In fact, clear understanding often leads to more effective responses. When you recognize what's really happening in an interaction, both in the other person and in yourself, you can address the actual issues rather than merely reacting to triggers. Sometimes exploring the roots of irritation brings up painful memories or unresolved trauma. What began as simple annoyance with someone's behavior can open into deeper wounds from the past. Be gentle with yourself in this process. If exploration brings up overwhelming emotions, seek appropriate support. This might mean working with a therapist, talking with trusted friends, or engaging in self-care practices that help you process difficult feelings safely. Transforming long-established patterns takes time. You might understand intellectually what your irritations reveal about you, but still find yourself reacting strongly in the moment. This gap between insight and change can be frustrating. Approach this work as an ongoing practice rather than a one-time fix. Each instance of irritation offers a new opportunity to develop awareness and choose differently. Over time, these small choices create significant shifts in how you experience yourself and others. Jung's insight about irritation has implications beyond individual psychology. It offers a lens for understanding cultural conflicts, political polarization, and social change. Many societal tensions involve mutual irritation between groups with different values, beliefs, or practices. Conservatives and progressives irritate each other. Religious and secular groups trigger mutual annoyance. Different generations judge each other's approaches to life and work. Applying Jung's mirror principle to these dynamics suggests that what irritates us most in other groups often reflects disowned aspects of our own collective identity. The qualities we reject in them often exist within us in some form, though perhaps expressed differently. For example, those who criticize others for being too political often have strong political views themselves, but present them as common sense rather than ideology. Those who complain about others being too sensitive may have their own sensitivities that they express in different contexts. Recognizing these projections can help societies move beyond polarized positions toward more nuanced understanding. It can transform the energy of mutual irritation into opportunities for collective growth and integration. Irritation belongs to a family of emotions that serve as messengers from our deeper selves. Anger, fear, sadness, shame, all carry information about our needs, values, and boundaries. All can lead to greater self-understanding when approached with awareness. In traditional psychology, emotions were often seen as problems to manage or overcome, but contemporary approaches recognize their wisdom and value. Each emotion has evolutionary and psychological purpose. Each tells us something important about our relationship to ourselves and our world. Irritation specifically reveals where we feel threatened or where important values seem at risk. It shows us boundaries we need to protect and aspects of ourselves we've denied or neglected. Far from being a problem to eliminate, irritation serves as a valuable guide to greater wholeness. By listening to this guide, rather than simply reacting to it, we transform what could be destructive into something constructive. We use the energy of irritation not to attack others, but to understand ourselves more deeply. As we practice seeing irritation as a pathway to self-understanding, we often notice several changes in our experience. When we no longer need others to change in order for us to feel okay, our relationships become more spacious. We can allow people to be who they are while still maintaining appropriate boundaries. This freedom transforms how we connect with family, friends, colleagues, and even strangers. As we develop skill in working with irritation, we become less easily thrown off balance by others' behavior. We still feel our emotions, but we're not controlled by them. We can respond thoughtfully rather than react automatically. This resilience extends to other emotional triggers as well. Recognizing the parts of ourselves that we've been projecting onto others leads to greater self-acceptance. We begin to embrace the fullness of who we are, including aspects that don't fit our ideal self-image. This acceptance doesn't mean we stop growing, but it does mean we grow from a place of compassion rather than self-rejection. When we understand what's really happening in our irritation, we can communicate more authentically. Instead of criticizing others' behavior, we can express our own needs and values clearly. This shift from blame to ownership creates possibilities for genuine connection and mutual understanding. Many creative and intellectual blocks stem from denied aspects of ourselves. As we integrate these aspects through the mirror of irritation, we gain access to more of our inner resources. Solutions to personal and professional problems emerge more easily when we're not fighting parts of ourselves. This perspective doesn't remove all conflict from relationships, but it does change how we engage with conflict. Instead of getting stuck in power struggles about who's right and who's wrong, we can approach differences with curiosity. Each irritation becomes a question. What can I learn here? How might this help me grow? The world is full of people who will irritate us. We cannot change that reality, but we can change how we respond to it. By turning our irritations into pathways of self-discovery, we transform potential sources of suffering into opportunities for greater wholeness and deeper connection. Carl Jung's wisdom reminds us that our reactions to others hold keys to understanding ourselves. Every irritation carries a message, if only we are willing to listen. And in listening, we find not just greater self-knowledge, but also greater freedom. The freedom to choose our responses rather than being controlled by our reactions. So the next time someone pushes your buttons, remember, that feeling of irritation might be the beginning of an important insight. It might be showing you something about yourself that you need to see. And in seeing it, you might discover a new path forward, one marked by greater awareness, compassion, and peace. We typically view irritation as a problem, an unpleasant emotion to minimize or avoid, but Jung's perspective invites us to see it differently, as a gift that points us toward greater wholeness. Every person who annoys us becomes a potential teacher. Every quality that bothers us reveals an aspect of ourselves, calling for attention and integration. Every irritating interaction offers an opportunity to know ourselves more deeply. This doesn't mean we should seek out irritation or remain in truly harmful situations, but it does mean that the ordinary frictions of daily life, the small annoyances and frustrations that we all experience, contain surprising wisdom when approached with awareness. By developing the habit of asking, "What might this irritation be showing me about myself?" we transform our emotional reactions from obstacles into opportunities. We use the mirror that others provide to see ourselves more clearly and to grow toward greater wholeness. This practice requires courage, honesty, and compassion. It asks us to look at aspects of ourselves that we might prefer to deny or project onto others. It challenges us to take responsibility for our reactions rather than simply blaming others for how we feel. But the rewards of this courageous self-reflection are profound. As we integrate the parts of ourselves that we've denied or neglected, we become more complete, more compassionate, and more capable of authentic connection. We find greater peace not because the world stops irritating us, but because we understand what that irritation means. In the end, Jung's insight offers a radical reframing of our daily interactions. What seemed like problems become opportunities. What felt like others' failings reveal our own growth edges. And what appeared to separate us from others becomes a path to deeper connection with ourselves and with all those whose differences once bothered us, but now teach us about our shared humanity. The journey from irritation to understanding never truly ends. There will always be new triggers, new reactions, new opportunities for growth. But with each step on this path, we become more whole, more free, and more able to meet life and all its irritations with an open heart and a curious mind.